The sun had been burning high above the plains since early morning, turning the dry land into a pale sheet of dust and heat waves. Coyotes hid deep in the cool shadows, and even the horses moved slow, swinging their tails in tired circles while they searched for any sign of shade. The frontier was harsh that season, and folks near the far western trails said it was the kind of heat that made a person question if they should keep fighting or give up and lie down in the sand. One tall cowboy rode that way alone, guiding his old horse along a narrow path that was rarely used by settlers. He was looking for water, but he was also trying to forget the things life had taken from him. He carried no fancy belongings, only a rifle on his saddle, a dull knife tied to his belt, and a worn pouch of jerked meat that had lost any kind of taste or comfort. He had once worked at a ranch where cattle filled the earth like a moving sea. But trouble struck and men turned against each other after blame and anger spread. Now he kept his voice low, trusted no man, and rode with a steady silence that matched the lonely wind. He knew the frontier held danger from animals, storms, hunger, and broken hearts, but it was still the only place where his thoughts felt somewhat steady. His boots were cracked, his hat looked like it had survived a war, and his horse walked like it had lived far beyond its best years, yet both kept going. Hoping the land would show mercy. By late afternoon, the wind stopped blowing and even the clouds refused to move. His shirt stuck to his back and sweat rolled down his neck like small crawling insects. That was when he noticed strange footprints near a dried creek, smaller and lighter than cowboy boots. He bent low and studied the earth with calm, steady eyes. The prints were bare, almost delicate, yet confident. He had seen tracks like that before in his younger years when he traded goods near Apache ground. It was a sign that someone had been there recently, maybe only minutes before he arrived. His heart tightened. The frontier was full of misunderstandings between cowboys and tribes, many caused by fear rather than truth. He had no wish to start trouble and no wish to be found near a camp where he did not belong. He pulled his reins and thought about turning back, but then he heard a faint sound hidden in the heat of the valley. It was not a bird, not a flowing stream, and not the wind. It sounded like a groan, weak and tired, like someone calling without strength left in their throat. He pressed forward slowly, hand near his holster, though he prayed he would not need it. The land sloped down into a dry gully, where a few thin shrubs tried to survive without rain. There he saw her. An Apache woman lay kneeling beside a flat rock, her breath heavy and her skin turning pale from heat exhaustion. Her long dark hair stuck to her face, chest, and neck, and she held the side of her dress as if it suddenly weighed more than a sack of coal. Her eyes showed pride even in weakness, but her condition was clear. She was not there by choice. She looked up at him, not with fear or anger, but with the desperate focus of someone fighting to stay alive. She tried to lift her canteen, but it was empty, and her hand dropped back to her side. He climbed down without sudden movement and took careful steps forward, keeping his voice low and respectful. He knew enough about tribal customs to understand that one wrong gesture could be mistaken as insult or danger. Before he could speak, she whispered that the heat was too strong for her body and she felt like she was burning under her own clothes. She asked him for help and said the heavy fabric was trapping the heat and making her dizzy. She did not ask out of shame, flirtation, or play, but out of pure survival. Her voice shook like someone fighting both pride and fear. She begged him to help her cool down before she fainted, or worse. The cowboy looked around. No water, no shade, no other living soul. He knew heat stroke could steal a life fast, sometimes faster than a rattlesnake bite. He also knew that if someone passed out in that kind of sun, they could die before another person found them. He removed his hat and offered it as shade while he reached into his saddlebag for cloth and a small tin cup. He dipped the cloth in the little water he had saved, knowing it may cost him, but doing it anyway. His voice was gentle, telling her she was safe, and he meant no harm. As he placed the cool cloth on the side of her neck and forehead, she inhaled sharply, relieved by the sudden comfort. She asked again with weak eyes, saying the dress was too hot for her body and that she could not loosen it alone because her fingers had gone numb. He hesitated, feeling caught between duty and fear of misunderstanding. He remembered stories of men who were punished for crossing cultural lines even when they meant well. But he also remembered how many nights he felt useless because he failed to protect those he cared about in the past. He swore he would not stand there pretending to think while someone suffered. He knelt beside her and tried to loosen the upper ties carefully, making sure his eyes stayed honest and his hands respectful. She looked at him with confusion mixed with relief, as if she wondered why a cowboy would help instead of turning away. He poured a few drops of water into her mouth and she swallowed slow, like every sip mattered. As he continued helping her cool her body, a strange calm settled between them, as if the land paused to watch. Then, just when her breathing seemed to steady, he heard something else move behind the rocks, heavy enough to shake small pebbles. It was not the wind and not an animal that moved alone. Hoofbeats or footsteps maybe, but too quiet to judge. The cowboy slowly turned his head, every muscle locked. The Apache woman stared past his shoulder, fear rising again, but this time not from heat. The cowboy placed his hand slowly near his belt, not fully touching his weapon but ready if choice became forced. The sound grew closer, steady and deliberate, and he felt the same chill as if winter suddenly touched the desert. Whoever or whatever was out there had been watching, maybe long enough to think the wrong thing. Before he could speak, the woman whispered only one warning. Just 2 short words that changed his heartbeat. They are close. He kept his eyes focused on the rocks while he lowered his voice and asked her if she knew who was nearby, but she only shook her head, still dizzy and struggling for steady breath. Her words felt thin like drifting smoke, and he could tell she feared something more than just being found. He stood slowly, placing his hat over her face to block the sun a little more, and then turned his stance sideways so he could protect her if the situation took a wrong turn. His horse twitched nervously, ears pointed toward the sound, sensing danger before any sign became clear. Out on the frontier, animals often knew more than men. For a few moments nothing happened. Then the cowboy saw the faint top of a feather crest slide above a boulder, almost too slow to notice. A second later, another small movement appeared on the opposite side. He felt the air tighten as though the land itself held breath. He wondered if they had been watching the whole time, misunderstanding what they saw and ready to judge without context. The woman placed her weak hand on his boot and whispered that she had been traveling alone after being separated from her small group. She said she did not belong to any raid or war band and had not been sent for any kind of trick. Her journey had begun with a peaceful purpose, not conflict, but the heat caught her before she could reach shade. The cowboy nodded, though he still did not speak loud, knowing every word carried weight. He understood how easy it was for fear to turn truth into poison. Years earlier he had seen 2 ranch hands argue over a missing tool, and somehow it became a story of theft, hatred, and revenge until bullets turned the dirt into dark mud. That memory stayed with him like an unseen scar. Out in the west, truth walked on thin ice even under the blazing sun. The hidden watchers did not reveal themselves yet, and the cowboy chose not to reach for his weapon, even though instinct told him to keep ready. He had once believed strength came from showing he could win any fight, but time changed him. He learned that real strength was keeping his hand steady even when his heart wanted to grab steel. He slowly knelt again beside the woman, whose lips were still dry, and told her he would help her stand if her legs allowed it. She held his arm with what little strength she had left, and after several seconds of struggle, she rose to her feet, though she swayed like a branch in strong wind. He guided her toward his horse for shadow, knowing that staying still would only invite trouble from heat and from whoever watched them, once she leaned against the saddle. He asked her name, but she shook her head and said she was not allowed to give it to a stranger yet, especially a cowboy. Instead, she told him only her purpose. She said her people had spoken of a far spring hidden in the valley, a healing place where the wind stayed cool and water tasted like morning air. She was sent to find it and bring back small proof, a sacred stone or leaf, so her elders could confirm if the land still held blessing. But she had taken a wrong path when clouds moved and blocked her sense of direction. She walked for hours, then the sun struck harder until the world started spinning. He listened closely, realizing that her journey was not selfish. It was not for gold, cattle, or fame, but for something spiritual and deeply rooted. In his world, people fought over land, bills, and cattle brands, Yet here she stood risking her life over something no one could own. Something that lived in belief and memory. He felt a strange tug in his chest, a feeling he had buried long ago when he lost someone he once cared for. He remembered how that person spoke of things that could not be touched yet mattered more than anything. He had forgotten how that felt until now. The watchers behind the rocks still did not act, and he wondered if they were not sure what to do either. Maybe they waited to see if he would harm her or treat her wrongly. Maybe they were deciding whether he was a threat or a rare traveler with a decent heart. He whispered that if they were Apaches, they would protect her honor, so he needed to be careful how he moved. The woman whispered that if they thought he forced her or disrespected her, they would not hesitate to defend her even if he meant no harm. Her voice trembled, not because she feared him, but because she feared a misunderstanding could lead to bloodshed. After a few more quiet moments, he decided to speak toward the rocks. Not loud enough to challenge, but strong enough to be heard. He said he was only helping and he did not wish to cross any sacred line. His voice carried calm instead of defense. The wind picked up slightly, brushing dust across the rocks, yet no answer came. He looked around again, but the watchers had vanished as quietly as they appeared. He wondered if they truly left or hid deeper in shadow to follow them unseen. He wanted to take her farther into shade, so he guided his horse slowly while helping her walk. She leaned against him as if too weak to stay upright without support. Every few steps she closed her eyes, fighting dizziness. The cowboy began talking in low tone, telling her about a small cabin far from any town, a place where he used to sharpen tools, clean pelts, and dry herbs. It had no fancy walls or windows, but it had shade and a small stream that sometimes kept water even when summer turned fierce. He said if she could ride with him, he could take her there and help her recover before deciding the next step. She looked into his eyes, trying to read his intention. She asked why a cowboy would risk helping her, knowing some folks in both worlds did not trust the other side. He answered with honesty. He said once he knew pain so heavy that he promised to never turn away from someone in need if he still had strength to give. Her breath steadied slowly, not because she trusted him fully yet, but because she understood sincerity when she heard it. Trust was not something her people handed out without reason. But she could see his eyes were steady, not hungry for trouble or pride. He lifted her gently onto the saddle, then walked beside the horse instead of riding it. The ground felt like hot coals under his boots, but he did not complain. As they traveled, he noticed marks on her dress that told a story of branches, dirt, and long walking. She had been fighting for survival much longer than he first thought. Her fingers were slightly swollen from dehydration, and her voice faded in and out like a dying ember. Still, she kept her dignity and did not ask for pity. When they finally reached an old cottonwood tree, its shadow felt like a blessing dropped from another world. He helped her down and placed his canteen beside her. She drank small sips, careful not to waste any drop. After resting a while, she began sharing more. She spoke of her tribe's traditions, how each young traveler must complete a spiritual task to prove their heart was ready to serve their people. She had chosen this journey herself, believing she was strong enough for it. She feared returning empty-handed more than she feared heat or wild land. The cowboy told her about his past too. How he once dreamed of running a quiet ranch where children played near a water pump and the smell of bread filled the air from a small stove by the door. That dream ended when a storm of lies ruined his standing among men he once trusted. He walked away to keep from turning bitter, but with every mile he traveled, the dream faded like old paint. Hearing her speak brought back a small piece of something he thought was gone forever. Not hope, but the memory of what hope felt like. As the wind cooled, she looked toward the west with nervous eyes. She said her journey was not finished, and she could not return until she found the sacred place. She feared that if they were watched, it could mean that someone else was also searching or guarding something in these lands. The cowboy remained silent while he studied the sky turning soft orange near sunset. He knew night could bring new dangers. Yet he also knew turning back would tear her spirit in a way no wound could heal. Then she asked something unexpected. She asked him why he stayed in the land if his heart carried sadness. He looked down and said the frontier was the only place where he could breathe with no false voices around. She nodded, understanding that even wide land could feel like a cage if someone carried heaviness inside. A moment later, she noticed something carved into the cottonwood bark, a small symbol barely visible to others. Her eyes widened slightly. She brushed her fingers across it, recognizing the mark. It was not random. It belonged to someone from her people, yet she could not tell if it was a sign of blessing or warning. The cowboy watched her expression change and asked what it meant. She closed her eyes for a quiet second, then opened them with a serious gaze. She said whoever carved that mark did it for someone to follow, but not everyone was meant to see it. And if she was able to find it, then someone else might be close too. The land no longer felt silent. The wind carried tension instead of comfort. And she whispered that if they continued toward the hidden place, both of their lives might change in ways they were not ready to face yet, but long journeys do not pause for comfort. They only wait for courage. And the night was coming fast. The sun moved lower, laying long shadows across the land, and the cowboy knew nightfall near the frontier could either offer safety or uncover threats that daylight kept quiet. He looked into the distance as if searching for answers the land never spoke out loud. The Apache woman leaned against the tree, her strength returning slowly, though her eyes remained sharp with worry. She kept glancing at the carved symbol, trying to read what message it carried. The cowboy asked her if it marked danger or guidance, but she said symbols could change meaning depending on who placed them there. Sometimes they warned travelers to turn back, sometimes they offered proof that someone survived a difficult task and moved ahead. She had to decide which meaning belonged to this moment. He prepared a small makeshift shelter using his coat and saddle as wind protection since the desert night could turn cold fast. He told her to rest, but she refused to fully close her eyes. Her spirit insisted that she stay alert, for she believed if she slept too deeply, someone might approach unseen. The cowboy admired her discipline and decided he would not sleep either. He sat with his back against the tree, rifle across his knees, watching the sky fade into deep blue. Coyotes howled from far hills, reminding them they were far from any settlement, far from law, comfort, or help. They only had each other and whatever willpower the frontier allowed. After a quiet hour, the woman spoke, not in fear, but in thoughtful tone. She asked him if he believed people could carry two truths at once. He did not understand, so she explained. She said a person could fear something and still walk toward it, could hate something and still miss it, or could want peace while holding anger like a burning coal. The cowboy nodded slowly, understanding more than he wished to reveal. She looked at him and said she sensed that he carried a heavy truth inside, not from a single moment, but from something that changed the course of his life. The cowboy stayed silent for a long time, staring at the stars. Then he said that sometimes the worst harm came not from enemies, but from those who once shared bread and worked side by side. She lowered her eyes. Knowing betrayal was not a wound easily healed, he asked her if she feared the unknown path ahead, and she admitted she feared not completing her purpose. She said failure was heavier than death to someone raised with honor. The cowboy paused before answering. He said he believed living with shame was harder than dying with pride. She listened carefully, realizing they understood each other more than they first knew. Their worlds were different, but their wounds walked on the same ground. Soon the wind changed direction, and the night brought a faint sound, distant but not natural. It was like wood tapping or leather brushing against rock. The cowboy stood slowly and scanned the dark hills. The woman rose too, although still weak. She whispered that someone was moving with intent, not wandering by accident. The cowboy raised his rifle slightly, not aiming, only preparing. The sound continued for a few seconds, then faded. He considered calling out, but the woman told him that whoever watched would not respond with words. Doing so would reveal their location too clearly. The cowboy agreed and lowered his voice, saying they would move early at first light. She told him that if they found the hidden spring, it could change everything for her people. She said sickness had touched their camp, and the elders believed the land might be unbalanced. A sacred place could restore blessing if they honored it correctly. The cowboy considered how different their values were from his former ranch life. Out there, water was business and survival, but not sacred in the way she described. Yet he also understood that land had spirit because he had seen men lose themselves when they forgot to respect it. Before dawn, he packed supplies while she washed her face with a little water to awaken her senses. She tied her hair back and adjusted her dress, standing taller than she had since he first found her. She told him she was ready. He helped her climb onto the horse again, but this time she managed it with a small effort rather than near collapse. They followed a narrow path between two hills where old shrubs grew in twisted shapes. The sky brightened slowly, painted with soft red streaks. They traveled without speaking for a long while, listening to each step their horse made, wondering whether someone still followed Dot as they climbed over loose rocks. The cowboy noticed tracks in the dust ahead. Hoofprints and footprints mixed together. Some were fresh. He stopped and touched the ground with his fingers. The woman leaned forward, eyes narrowing. She said these tracks belonged to more than one traveler, likely 2 or 3, and they were not random. The prints moved toward the same direction she needed to go. Her face showed concern and confusion. She wondered if others from her tribe were attempting the same trial or if someone sought to obtain the sacred reward for their own benefit. The cowboy asked if there were rival groups who might want the sacred water source or whatever proof she hoped to bring back. She answered carefully. She said not all tribes lived in harmony, and some outsiders believed old sacred places held treasures or hidden power. Some men did not search out of faith, but out of greed. He understood. He had seen how greed could twist even a decent man. He remembered how some ranchers tried to take land from small families, using lies and contracts to disguise theft as business. As they traveled deeper into the valley, birds stopped singing and the air felt unnaturally still. The woman placed her hand on the carved symbol near her waist, a small wooden emblem tied with rawhide. She said she carried it as her spiritual identity, marking her intention as pure. The cowboy asked if it protected her. She answered that it did not shield her from harm, but it showed the ancestors she came as a seeker, not a taker. He respected that, even though his world had no such symbols. They finally came upon a narrow gorge, where the rock walls stood tall like an open doorway. The woman recognized a faint marking on the stone wall, shaped like a moon. Her eyes brightened gently. She said it meant she was near one of the guiding signs. Yet she also noticed fresh ash near the ground, showing that someone had built a small fire there within a day. The cowboy studied the ashes and found a broken piece of cloth caught on a thorn. It did not belong to his companion. He held it up and she moved closer. Her face froze slightly. She whispered that the fabric looked similar to clothing worn by one of her young warriors who left camp months ago, and never returned if true. It meant someone from her people may have tried to find the sacred place before her. The cowboy asked if that person could still be alive. She could not be sure. Some who failed to complete a spiritual journey were said to become shadows of themselves, choosing to live alone rather than return in shame. The idea troubled her deeply. The cowboy could see her courage battling fear. They continued into the gorge, and the air became cooler, giving them reason to believe water might be close. The woman gained hope, but the cowboy stayed cautious. He knew conflicts did not always appear as loud confrontations. Sometimes they hid beneath quiet ground until the perfect moment to strike. Inside the gorge, they found the remains of another camp, though it looked abandoned. A few feathers, broken arrows, and a flint-stone knife lay near the wall. The scene felt heavy, like the memory of someone who left without farewell. As they stepped farther, they saw more symbols carved in different spots, some newer, some older. The woman read them softly, almost like prayer. She said they spoke of courage, loss, sacrifice, and warning. The cowboy felt tension tighten his chest as he heard faint whispers carried by wind. He turned quickly but saw no one. He wondered if his mind was playing tricks or if someone stood beyond the rocks, unseen. The woman placed her hand flat on a large symbol, closed her eyes, and let out a slow breath. She said they were close to discovering something, but she feared what else they might uncover. The cowboy looked around with sharp caution, sensing that the deeper they went, the closer they came to something that changed the air. He asked her if she was ready to face whatever they found, and she answered with a steady gaze that she did not travel to turn back at fear's door. But before they could move forward, they heard footsteps behind them, slow and deliberate, belonging to someone who did not hide anymore. The cowboy placed himself between her and the approaching shadow, knowing the next moment could decide whether this path led toward revelation or danger, and the shadow kept walking closer. The figure walking toward them moved slow, not like someone sneaking, but like someone who had no reason to rush. The cowboy placed one foot slightly back to steady himself while keeping the rifle down but ready. The woman stood behind him, her eyes fixed on the shadowy outline forming between the rocks. The silence grew so heavy it felt like the air itself might crack. Then the stranger stepped forward where the light reached his face. He was lean, weathered, and carried deep lines that looked carved by both sorrow and survival. His hair was long, tied loosely, and he wore pieces of clothing that looked torn from different journeys, not fitting any single group. He stared at them without anger, yet without warmth, as if he was not sure whether they were ghosts, enemies, or the last living souls in the valley. The woman studied him with wide eyes and whispered that he looked like someone from her tribe, who vanished long ago. Possibly the same young seeker who left to prove himself before she began her own journey. The man breathed slowly through his nose, his gaze locked on her emblem. He spoke with a rough voice, saying he had been here for many moons, searching for the sacred spring and proof that the land's blessing still lived. He said the land tested him until he had no strength to return home, and eventually he believed no place wanted him. His voice trembled slightly, as if touching memories too heavy to carry, yet too painful to forget. The cowboy asked him if he meant harm or needed help. The man did not answer right away. He turned toward the rock symbols instead and traced one with his fingertips, like someone who had repeated the motion for comfort. He said he saw them enter the path and thought they might be enemies or treasure seekers. He explained that others had once come through, not from any Apache tribe, but outsiders who spoke of magic water and secret riches. Some left quickly, frightened by strange sounds and symbols, while others disappeared in deeper caves. He never found out if these people left the valley or became part of its hidden silence. The woman stepped forward, ignoring the cowboy's attempt to keep her close. She spoke to the stranger in her native language for a brief moment, soft and respectful, trying to understand his spirit. Whatever she said brought a different look to his eyes, not wild or lost, but something like recognition. He told her he had failed his trial, that he believed he was no longer worthy to return, and that shame kept him prisoner more than hunger or cold ever did. She reached toward him, not touching him, but holding her hand open like an invitation. She said no person could fail as long as their heart still wanted to serve with truth. Her words seemed to hit him deeper than any physical blow. He looked at her and asked if she truly came for the same purpose he once held. When she nodded, his shoulders lowered slightly, as if part of his burden loosened. The cowboy broke the moment by suggesting they move soon, because he sensed someone else could still be watching. The valley held too many shadows that could hide any number of intentions. The woman agreed, but she asked the lost traveler if he wanted to walk with them instead of staying alone. He did not answer right away, but he finally nodded, saying he would guide them toward the next marker. He warned them that the sacred spring was close, but the path ahead was filled with challenge, not from creatures but from choices. He said the land tested the mind and heart more than the body, and only those with clear purpose could understand what the sacred place truly meant. They began walking together through a narrow canyon, where the echoes felt like whispers from unseen spirits. The cowboy held the reins while the woman walked beside him, determined but cautious. The lost traveler led the way, stepping carefully as though each stone carried its own story. Sometimes he paused to look at carvings along the rock walls, and other times he closed his eyes as though listening for direction beyond what human ears could hear, the deeper they moved. The cooler the air became, yet the suspense grew stronger. The atmosphere felt neither safe nor hostile, only charged with meaning none of them could fully name. At one point, the cowboy saw something shiny on the ground. He bent down to pick it up and found a rusted metal badge, half buried under dust. It belonged to an old scout or soldier from long ago, proof that others before them had searched these lands for reasons different from spiritual purpose. The woman looked at the badge with sadness, saying some people looked at nature with hungry eyes, believing only in ownership rather than harmony. The cowboy tucked the badge away, unsure why he kept it, but feeling it might matter later. As they reached a wider clearing between rocks, the lost traveler raised his hand, signaling them to stop. He pointed toward a distant wall formation where a faint glow reflected, not from torches or fire, but from something natural. He said that beyond that wall lay the final path, but before they could reach it, they must face what the land needed them to face. The cowboy asked what that meant, and the traveler only answered that the earth does not open sacred things to those who come with fear stronger than purpose. The woman stepped forward first and placed her hand over her emblem. She whispered a prayer from her childhood, one her elders taught her to steady the spirit. Slowly, they approached the glowing stone wall. The air around it felt charged, like the moment before rain. The rock surface had carvings in circles, shapes, and symbols telling stories no outsider could decode. As she approached, words formed in her memory, teachings she almost forgot. She began to translate, speaking quietly. The symbols warned that water from sacred ground must not be taken with greedy intent and must be honored with truth. She felt a chill down her spine when she reached the final part. It said those who entered must show what they carried inside, not with hands or tools but with heart, before they could react further. A sudden loud crack shook the ground behind them. A rock tumbled from above and rolled near their feet. The cowboy raised his rifle quickly, scanning the cliffs while the woman held her breath. The lost traveler stepped back and whispered that something or someone wanted to prevent them from reaching the spring. More stones shifted in the distance, enough to show that the danger was not just imagined. The cowboy called out, asking if someone was there, but no response came. Then the woman spotted movement high above. A silhouette stood near the cliff edge, watching silently. The cowboy gripped his weapon, but the woman touched his arm, telling him to wait. She said no shot should be fired unless the land demanded it, and they must not act without knowing who or why. The stranger on the cliff finally moved slightly, and they saw what looked like a cloak or blanket flapping softly in the wind. The lost traveler whispered that others searching for power might have found their way there too, and they could be planning to take control of whatever lay ahead. The cowboy wondered why anyone would risk their life over something they barely understood. The silhouette disappeared from sight, turning the moment colder. The cowboy urged that they continue but stay cautious. The woman nodded, though fear sat heavy in her eyes. She told them that if her journey ended there without reaching truth, she would carry regret forever. The lost traveler appeared conflicted, torn between following the path and protecting others from repeating his mistakes. Finally, he said the land would decide. Not their fear. They walked slowly along the narrow final path, hearing drops of water somewhere beyond the rocks. The woman's heart beat faster, believing she was close to the sacred place. Yet every step felt heavier, like the land was measuring their intent. The cowboy felt the weight too, not from spiritual duty, but because he wanted her to find peace after all she endured. Each of them carried a different purpose, but their footsteps fell in the same rhythm. Just before the path turned, they saw strange markings on the ground, footprints mixed between moccasin prints and boots. The cowboy crouched and touched the soil. He whispered that someone else was ahead and they might not be friendly. The woman pressed her emblem tightly, knowing the final stretch could bring confrontation rather than blessing. With tension rising and the sound of distant water calling them forward, they stepped into the last curve of the hidden path, unaware of what or who waited in the shadows ahead. The path turned sharply, leading them into a place where the rock walls widened and opened like a hidden room carved by nature. At first it seemed empty, but then the soft sound of falling water filled the air, gentle like a whisper yet strong enough to feel like hope. The woman stepped forward with wide eyes, her breath unsteady from both surprise and relief. In the center of the space, Water poured quietly from a narrow gap in the rock and fell into a clear pool surrounded by smooth stones. A faint mist hovered above it, catching light from a hidden opening above, giving it a peaceful glow. The cowboy saw the look in her eyes and understood without words that this was the sacred spring she had been searching for. The place had held meaning far deeper than survival, but before they could take another step, a figure emerged from behind the tall boulders, holding a revolver that looked worn but dangerous. The stranger on the cliff had beaten them there. His voice was thin and shaky, like someone who feared losing something more than he feared death. He ordered them not to come closer, saying he discovered the spring first and planned to claim it. The cowboy lowered his own weapon but kept his stance firm. He spoke calmly, saying no one here wanted to steal anything. The woman lifted her emblem to show her purpose, but the stranger shook his head with trembling fear. He believed the water held great power or hidden wealth, something he wanted to use or trade. His eyes carried desperation, not greed. The cowboy recognized that kind of look. It belonged to someone whose life had been stripped of direction, someone searching for the fastest way to change his fate. The lost traveler stepped forward with steady breath. He told the stranger that the spring did not belong to anyone. It was not a treasure chest or secret fortune. It was a spiritual place that needed respect, not ownership. The stranger pointed the revolver at him, thinking he was lying. The cowboy watched closely, prepared to move even if it cost him injury. The woman then spoke with calm strength, saying if he truly came to take the water, he would end up fighting the land itself, and no man had ever won that battle. The stranger hesitated, lowering his eyes just long enough for doubt to slip in. The cowboy slowly raised one hand, palm open, and told him that life could be rebuilt in honest ways, not through something that was never meant to be traded. He explained how he himself once lost everything and walked alone for months trying to find something that could fill the emptiness inside. He said he learned that what matters most can never be stolen. The stranger's grip weakened, his hand shaking harder as his mind wandered between fear and exhaustion. Finally, his revolver lowered and he dropped to his knees, breathing heavily. He said he had been chased from towns, blamed for things he did not do, and turned into someone who trusted no soul. He believed finding something powerful would force the world to look at him differently. The woman walked to him carefully and placed her emblem near his heart. She said the spring did not judge him, but it would not heal his life unless he understood that healing began from truth and forgiveness, not pride or possession. The stranger cried quietly, covering his face with both hands. The cowboy placed his gun away, feeling the tension fade like morning frost under sunlight. The lost traveler knelt beside the man as well, telling him that shame was not a permanent prison. The valley could be a place of beginning, not the end. After a long silence, the woman approached the sacred water with slow, respectful steps. She knelt and dipped her hands gently, not drinking yet, only touching it with gratitude. She whispered words of thanks to the ancestors and asked for blessing for her people. She did not ask for personal gain. She asked for health for children, strength for elders, and peace between worlds that misunderstood each other. Then she filled a small carved pouch with water and sealed it with cloth and prayer, knowing this was enough proof for her tribe. She looked at the spring one last time, promising in her heart to guard its secret. The lost traveler remained kneeling, eyes closed, as if the place had finally allowed him to breathe like a whole person again. He opened his eyes and told them he was ready to return home, no matter how long the path or how many questions waited for him. The woman smiled softly, saying his return itself proved courage. The cowboy helped the stranger stand, and for the first time, the man looked at him without fear or suspicion. There was a quiet agreement between them that they had crossed something far greater than dry land. As they prepared to leave, the cowboy looked around the sacred place. He had no spiritual mission, yet he felt as if something invisible inside him lightened. It was not that his past vanished, but it stopped hurting the same way. He finally understood that some journeys heal in silence rather than in glory. The woman carefully tied her pouch to her belt and told the cowboy she owed him her life. He shook his head, saying he only did what any decent person should. She replied that decency was rare enough to be sacred too. The four of them walked back through the valley, No longer strangers tied by chance, but people bound by shared truth. The air felt clearer, and the shadows no longer threatened. By the time they reached the cottonwood tree, night had lifted and a soft blue morning light flowed across the land. The woman turned to the cowboy and asked what he planned to do after they reached safer ground. He looked at the sky for a moment, then said he might rebuild his dream somewhere far from harsh voices. Maybe buy a small patch of land where no one cared about his past, and where he could plant something worth tending again. The lost traveler said he would go home and face his elders. Not with fear, but with honesty, admitting that he got lost but never gave up hope. The stranger said he wanted a chance to start fresh and learn how to work with his hands, instead of carrying a gun like it was a shield. The cowboy told him that honest work, no matter how small, could change a man's life faster than luck. When they finally reached the open plain, the woman stopped and looked back at the valley one last time. She placed her hand over her emblem and smiled with calm confidence. She said the mission was no longer only about sacred water, but about proving that trust and courage could come from unexpected places and people. She thanked the cowboy again, saying he walked beside her not because he had to, but because he cared. And that was something worthy of honor. She then placed her hand on his chest, right over his heartbeat, and told him that he must never believe he was alone again. She said the frontier was wide, but kind souls always found their way to each other. The cowboy lowered his hat slightly, full of quiet emotion. He promised her that whatever life gave him next, he would face it with the same strength she showed in the valley. They parted ways near a fork in the trail, each walking with new purpose. The woman headed toward her tribal home with proof in her pouch and renewed spirit in her heart. The lost traveler walked beside her, ready to reclaim his place among his people. The stranger walked toward the nearest settlement with an honest chance to start over. And the cowboy rode off slowly, not with an empty soul, but with a heart touched by a journey that taught him something more powerful than victory or revenge. He learned that the frontier was not only a land of danger, but also a land where broken things could be repaired when the right hearts crossed paths. And somewhere behind him, far in the hidden valley, the sacred spring kept flowing for those who came with pure spirit, carrying truth like a flame that never dies.